Good evening. Welcome to the March General Meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. My name is Cheryl Gannon, and I'm the president of the Civic Fed. We will start now tonight with routine business. First is approval of the agenda, which was published on page 2 of the newsletter. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Any abstentions? The agenda is approved. Next is approval of the minutes of the February general membership meeting, which were printed on page 7 of the newsletter. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? The minutes are approved. Next is the treasurer's report. Jerry Garson is our treasurer. Go ahead, Jerry.
So far this year, we operate on a fiscal year from July 1 through March 10. We've collected $1,974 in dues. We've had expenses of $1,228. Our net income for the period is $745. Our current bank balance is $6,963. If there are any questions, contact me later.
Okay, next we have just a couple of announcements. Please note that at the conclusion of the speaker program tonight, we will have a presentation by the Bylaws Committee on their work and their proposed changes. Please stay with us to hear that. Yesterday, we sent an email announcing a special meeting with Councilmember Friedson on March 24th at 6:30 p.m. by Zoom to discuss the More Housing Now proposal. Please plan on joining us. If you did not receive the email and the link, please email me or Alan for it. And yes, you can share it in your communities. Sunday, June 8th, make a note of that, is our in-person awards ceremony this year at Hollywood East. And it will also be our 100th anniversary celebration. We're hoping to have a nice crowd there, and we'll be inviting elected officials to come by and see us. So if you could mark June 8th on your calendar, please. Are there any other announcements? Okay, I'll call on Jerry now to introduce our speaker.
I would like to welcome Rich Madaleno, the Chief Operating Officer of Montgomery County and the #2 person in the county after Mark Elridge. He has been a state senator in the Maryland legislature working on the state budget and probably is the most knowledgeable person on the county's budget, which will be released next week. We're glad to have him again speaking to the Montgomery County Civic Federation, Inc., giving us insight into the impacts that will occur from the actions of the federal and state governments. Without any further ado, Rich.
Thank you, Jerry, very much for that kind and very generous introduction. Again, my name is Rich Madaleno. I have the honor to be the Chief Administrative Officer for the county government. Jerry summed it up well, the #2 person to the county executive. I've been in this role since the summer of 2020. I was the county budget director before that. And during my career, I've served in the General Assembly as a senator and delegate representing Chevy Chase, Kensington, where I live, Wheaton, and Silver Spring. I worked for the county government before that in their Office of Intergovernmental Relations, and then as a budget analyst with the state before that. So I've been in and around the state and county budgets for, hard to believe, for more than 30 years at this point. So happy to talk about all things state and county about the budget. The county executive will release his recommended FY26 budget this Friday morning. You're welcome to come to the executive office building in the morning for his presentation to the public at 10 a.m. So, but everything will be online that morning, so you can see all of the information. So good news that I can tell you about the budget coming out. The difficulty for tonight is I can't really go into the details since that's up to the county executive to release all that information and talk about what's happening with the county budget and the state budget. This will be an exceedingly difficult budget to release because the county charter says it has to come out on March 15th. If that's on a weekend, the executive has flexibility. He's deciding to release it a day before he has to on Friday, the 14th. The reason why I say it's difficult is, we know that there is, you could describe it as chaos, disruption, uncertainty at the federal level with what the Trump administration is doing. And then there's a degree of fiscal uncertainty with the state. Usually by this point in the 90-day state legislative session, the General Assembly will have started to make more of their fiscal decisions. And so we have an idea of where they're going. For understandable reasons, this year they are about 2 weeks behind where they're supposed to be from moving the budget and related fiscal measures. So we really don't know what the state is going to do. And I bring that up because the governor has put forward a variety of proposals that would both potentially increase expenditures for the county, a number of items that are currently state responsibility, shifting all or most commonly part of the cost that the state pays for our residents onto us, as well as making a variety of tax law changes that would automatically increase county revenues because of the structural changes that he makes to the state. I'm happy to talk about those things. But for example, his proposals would increase county spending, whether directly through the government or through the school system, which of course is financially dependent upon the county government right now, in the tune of $37 million. But his tax proposals would increase our revenues by $75 million. So it's hard to figure out, especially since the legislature has taken really no action on any of these proposals, to know what to include on either side of the ledger. And so unfortunately, come Friday, I doubt the county executive will have the ability to or the crystal ball to incorporate any of those proposals in the county budget. So he will release the budget on the 14th, and then when the General Assembly is done, he will release amendments. That's very common every year. There are always things that happen, opportunities that have arisen, and the executive submits amendments to the council following the General Assembly session. So this year will be no different. I just wanted to let you know there are some large question marks when it comes to the state that, again, make this a difficult year. For some background, and I know Jerry, Alan, many of you know this, have heard this. Montgomery County receives 90% of its revenue from two revenue sources: the income tax and the property tax. Maryland is the only state in the country that not only allows, but requires each one of the county governments to have a local income tax. You have to make that choice between 2.5% to 3.2% as a flat tax on income. Most counties, including Montgomery County, are at the 3.2% maximum. So there's no change that could happen in the income tax unless the General Assembly in the next few weeks provides local governments with an ability to change their income tax. And there are bills to do that, but none of them have started moving. And then the property tax makes up the other 45% of our revenues. Maryland has a rule for counties to have one property tax rate for all classes of property. So unlike our neighbors in the District of Columbia or in Virginia, we have one tax rate that covers all properties, whether it's a shopping center, an office building, a townhouse, a single family home, an apartment building. There's one rate for all real property in the county. So of course, the county has flexibility over establishing that rate And there's a whole process around establishing the rate. But Montgomery County currently has a rate that I'm just going to round is $1.04 per $100 of assessed value. Compared to all of our jurisdictions around us, that is lower, and in some cases lower by a large magnitude than our neighboring jurisdictions, except for the District of Columbia that has an 85-cent residential property tax, but because they can charge different rates for different classes, their top rate for values for commercial properties valued at in excess of $10 million is $1.89. So a tremendous difference in the rates for classes of property. And then Arlington has a slightly lower tax rate, I think by a cent lower than us. But Virginia allows their counties to charge, they all charge an additional 12.5 cents in on commercial properties, and then both Arlington and Fairfax, Loudoun have a variety of special taxing districts that cover parts of their county that add to the rates. So a home in McLean, for example, is paying $1.20. A home in Reston is paying $1.22. A home in Bethesda is paying $1.04. A home in Columbia and Howard County is paying believe it or not, $1.33. A home in Prince George's is paying $1.37. A home in Frederick is paying $1.11. So as you can see around us, most of the property tax rates are indeed higher than in Montgomery County. The other taxes that we collect are from a range of smaller taxes: admissions and amusement tax, an energy tax, the bag fee, a series of telephone taxes, the 911 fee. So those make up the rest of our picture. Unlike Virginia, our Virginia neighbors and the District of Columbia, we generate almost all of our taxes off of the people who live in the county. In Maryland, the sales tax is entirely a state revenue source. So obviously the District of Columbia is a unitary entity. They get all of the taxes they get stay in part of the district government. Virginia, the sales tax is split between the state and the county. So Fairfax and Arlington get 1.7 cents, and the state collects 4.3 cents on every dollar for a combined 6-cent rate. Maryland has a 6% rate, and that goes entirely to the state. I forget where the District of Columbia is right now. DC, Virginia jurisdictions all have a meals tax, which is a sales tax in addition to the regular sales tax. When on food and beverages at a restaurant, Arlington's combined rate is 10%. Fairfax doesn't have one now, but they are looking at adding 4% to that. So to go to 10%, Arlington is looking to add 1% to go to 11%. So another way where there's a major difference. And of course, the Virginia counties continue to have a personal property tax on items that are owned by individuals that doesn't occur in Maryland. So Virginia, you still pay car tax, personal property tax assessed on your cars, your boats, any item like that. So that adds to the Virginia taxes. So a little bit about where we are. Property tax assessments went up this year. Again, there's been healthy growth for the last several years in property valuations, which of course helps drive the estimates for the property tax higher. Income tax continues to perform very well. We have a wealthy and diverse community as far as where people are earning money. So while we have 77,000 individuals, residents of the county who work, I think I'm trying to pull that off the top of my head, for the federal government, that only represents a little more than 10% of the people who are employed Montgomery County residents who are employed. Obviously, there are more that are contractors, but many of those are contractors in the defense field and not on the civilian side. So, and we are fortunate to have a sizable number of very wealthy people whose income is not tied directly to the federal government. So, our income tax revenues continue to perform very strongly. As far as people being laid off from the federal government, trying to track that, there's what is being reported in the news and then what we see in a variety of accessible databases. For example, people who are filing for unemployment insurance claims. Now, there are a lot of reasons why people might delay filing a claim, but so far this year, let me see, there are 460 more claims for unemployment insurance from Montgomery County residents to the state than who are former federal employees than this time last year. 460. You have to file a claim for unemployment insurance in the jurisdiction you last worked. So if you're a federal employee whose job was based in the District of Columbia, and that's where your job was eliminated, laid off, however, fired, you have to file in the District of Columbia. They've seen more claims, but nothing in the range of claims that are tied to the numbers that have been reported in the press. So we're trying to balance the extreme media operation from the White House, where they want to roll up and put in numbers as high as possible with what's accurate on the ground. You've probably seen the reporting in the Post, in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal about the claims that Trump and Elon Musk have made about the number of contracts that have been canceled, the number of building leases, that have been canceled. When you look into that, we haven't been able to find a lease in the county that was canceled that wasn't already expiring. We haven't found that many of the contracts that are in the Doge database that show being canceled are of multi-year contracts, mainly those that are already expiring this year, many of them already completely spent down. So they're rolling up numbers that are impossible to confirm. But the big news is, I think if you want the headline, if you want to show how hard you're being, they're putting this information out, and it's hard to determine its factual accuracy. So, I know the British during World War II, famously had the signs and they keep calm and carry on. I think that's our approach to the budget right now, is keep calm and carry on. We know there are a lot of flashing red lights and yellow lights out there. We know there are many pieces of the puzzle we have to figure out. But there is so much uncertainty that I think you're going to see an approach from the county executive that is anchored in what we know and what our continued responsibilities are to our community and the other legal obligations that we have to meet in the budget that he puts forward. And again, the first step of this process is him releasing his budget this year on March 14th. And the county's budget cycle will end on the Thursday before Memorial Day, is when the county council needs to pass the budget. And then during that time, obviously, there'll be ample public hearings, work sessions, all things that you as an organization and many of you individually are very engaged in during the next 2 months. So with that, I'm happy to stop and answer questions.
Okay, raise your hand if you have some questions for Mr. Madaleno. Carrie Lamari, go ahead.
Oh my God, Gary Lamari, ask a question. How out of character?
Hey, Rich, how you doing, my friend?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. This has to do with the CIP board. It does the operating budget, but I'm sure you're familiar with the Supreme Court case on impact taxes, and Nolan versus Dillon, where contractor or developers don't have to pay impact taxes unless they are proportionate and have a direct relationship between their project and the impact that they're creating. I know that this past year we were short what, 71 or 81 million dollars in the CIP because we didn't collect enough impact taxes. They're being challenged across the country right now, and jurisdictions are they're scratching their head trying to figure out what are they going to do. How are they going to address the standards that the Supreme Court has just established? My question to you is, what are we going to do about it, and how will that affect our budget?
So, before I answer that question, as Carrie started to talk, I realized as I had moved some things around on my desk, my microphone was pointed away from me. Can
Okay.
everyone hear me clearly? Has everyone been able to hear what I've said? Okay.
Perfectly.
Okay, good, because I was not seeing Jerry's image is so tiny on the screen. I couldn't tell if he was still paying attention or was so disturbed by what I was saying that he couldn't hear me but didn't want to say anything. So good. So Carrie, interesting you should bring that up because you know that Mark Elrich, since he's been county executive, has been talking repeatedly about the need for the county to move away from our current approach to impact taxes. Because the reality is we charge a large upfront rate, which only makes development more expensive on the front end. And because we're asking for one lump sum payment on for the development, we can't necessarily tie the payment to any of the improvements that are needed for that project. And what he would like us to do, and maybe as the repercussions from the Supreme Court decision play out, is move away from impact taxes into the approach that Virginia has used, which I touched upon briefly, which is the combination of different classes of properties paying different tax rates, and then special taxing districts around specific improvements. For example, the Silver Line project is being paid for partly by two property tax zones, special taxing districts for phase 1 and phase 2. So I think the first one runs like to Reston, and this phase 2 runs from Reston to the airport. And in both of those cases, there's an initial 20-cent additional tax for commercial properties in those two districts. But the phase 1, because the Silver Line brought in more investment and more infrastructure through the special taxing district, they've already been able to lower that rate from 20 cents to 18 cents. So he has said repeatedly, he's asked the General Assembly, and in a half an hour, they will be taking up a measure that would allow counties to do the same thing in Maryland and have a different rate for different types of of property so as to allow us to move away from impact taxes and towards a structure that actually allows us to support the infrastructure that's needed for continued growth and development around the county. So I hope
Well,
I answered that question, and the idea is clearly the Supreme Court decision, I think, may hasten the need to move down that path.
right. Well, I mean, the Supreme Court's already unanimously voted that impacts are taking under the Fifth Amendment. The reason why I'm bringing that up is the council is now looking at some very large housing proposals tomorrow. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the infrastructure then to support that development and any other development that we are going to build is now going to be shifted from a developer or developer fund to the public. So we're not only going to have to pay property taxes, but we're going to have to pay for the infrastructure, especially the pilot program money, the 25-year tax abatement.
Yes.
We're going to get stuck with all of it. So we're going to get stuck with all of the pilot. Plus, apparently, we're going to be paying for the new infrastructure to support the new growth. It sounds like. I mean, if you're shifting it,
I see what you're. No, I look. The county executive has many issues with the housing now.
oh, I understand that.
So including the 25-year
Pilot.
pilot, but the pilot would be you'd get no, you'd have
It's an abatement.
$1 for a property tax for 25 years. When you look at the way that Virginia has crafted their special taxing districts, it's been on commercial property only. So the individual homeowners would not be charged the impact, because part of the Virginia model is trying to say, like, okay, this new development around commercial properties, and I'll be very clear, rental housing is a commercial endeavor.
Venture.
So, but that they would pay as that's building, they would pay more in the property tax so as to create both the mechanism to get the revenues, but not saddle developers with the upfront cost, but actually create a revenue stream that would allow a government to, and this has been one of our major hurdles, to bond against that revenue stream to do a big project. Because
but there's a big but there, Richard. If impact taxes are taking, and you cannot charge the developer now unless he has to pay his basic proportionate share, right? In an impact fee, then the public has to pick up that cost. Somebody's got to pay for it, or the infrastructure doesn't get built. So if the developer's not paying for it, we're paying for it. Come on, Richard.
No, I see your point. No, it's not perfect. I mean, it is.
It's common sense.
It is hard to construct a system that will deliver infrastructure that will in my humble opinion, that will forever put that cost only on the new development. Because you got to take a risk on some of it. You got to start funding the work in order to get some of the development to occur. So, but the goal is to make as much as possible the new development pay for the new infrastructure.
Yeah, but the court says you can't do that.
Right.
Well, no,
That's
but
enough.
what the court said is, to me, when I read that court decision, is you can't, you have to be able to show the nexus to it. It's hard. We can't, I think
Proportionality and
well,
relationship.
well, right.
That's
So
what
it'd be
the court
hard,
said.
it'd be hard to say like, okay, you're building a new apartment building in Bethesda and we're going to use the impact tax to build a new school in Clarksburg.
Yeah, you can't do that.
So, and that's traditionally in many ways, that's what we've done. Um,
Right.
so I know that's why that to me, there's a risk to the county around that decision. We haven't seen it play out here like it did in California.
So it's not being addressed in the decision on tomorrow's zoning decision, obviously. Thank you.
Okay, Deborah Gansky.
Hi, Deborah.
Good.
Sorry. Hi. So I was also interested in the payment in lieu of taxes. Um, as many people around here, as you probably know, are already talking about the high cost of property taxes and also our aging infrastructure, which I have to say we did have water main blow up like a couple weeks ago right by our house. So what are we doing about and I'm sure Bethesda and Chevy Chase and some of the older areas are also, what are we going to do to fund our aging infrastructure and repairing it and in a non-emergency capacity without property taxes from new development? So kind of following on.
Um, if I had the coherent, perfect answer for you, I should probably be doing something larger than the CAO of Montgomery County, as large and important a role that I have. So, we have a legacy of lots of decisions, right? The WSSC Water is our water utility. It's a separate entity. They have, they are working hard to try to figure out what is the future for them from a, broadly speaking, a revenue structure in order to do the work necessary to keep the current system functioning. And right now we pay, the way WSSC approaches it is it's all done through the quarterly bill that we pay to the WSSC with the amount of water that we use and the sewer charge. For example, I'm using this as an example. I'm confident the county executive is not going to be proposing the WSSC use this, but for example, the WSSC has the ability through law to have a property tax. If you go into Howard County, their $1.33 property tax includes 8 cents that goes to their water utility, which you might be aghast to learn is the Baltimore City water department, because the actual Baltimore City government provides water and sewer to the entire Baltimore metropolitan area. So, but the WSSC has struggled with some of the issues around. We've all become smarter with the way that we use water. We've invested in lots of different appliances that have reduced our water consumption. The number of people living in each house has, over the decades gone down. So water consumption has gone down. So we are a victim of our own success. We've championed policies that have brought down water usage, but haven't magically made the pipes last longer in bigger swings in weather. So they're working through with us, with the council, they're trying to figure out how we move forward with creating a revenue structure for them that allows them to continue to invest in keeping the system functioning to the greatest degree possible, reinvesting in pipes, replacing pipes that we know are, past their normal lifespan. So that's an issue that WSSC is is working on, and I don't mean to go down the WSNC rabbit hole because you brought it up first, but when you look at other infrastructure, it's the same thing. And for us, I love using this statistic. In Virginia, all roads are state roads. The Fairfax County government maintains 10 miles of roads. We maintain 5,400 miles of lanes in the county. So we got to fill potholes. We got to repave them. We have to plow them and repair them. So we and that's just part of our general government that you all are paying your income taxes and property taxes to work on. And then we also have to deal with the state, who of course then maintains all of the numbered roads from the Beltway to Rockville Pike to Strathmore and Knowles. That also happens to be a state road. So we have little roads, big roads that are done by the state. So it's a web in Maryland that's very different than Virginia. But we are struggling as a community, as a state, county, region, nation, right, to address infrastructure and the needs to maintain infrastructure while we're dealing with the impacts of climate change that are putting stress on the infrastructure in different ways. And many of our tax policies, are structured around, like for roads, gas taxes. And again, being a victim of our own success, we've managed to champion and convince people to go with cars that either use no gas or use much less gas that still are putting the same amount of weight on all the roads. And then, the governor has proposed, for example, a 75-cent surcharge on every delivery that's made like through UPS or Amazon or DoorDash to our homes, with the whole idea of all of these deliveries are putting more vehicles, especially heavier vehicles, on our local roads that are then impacting the quality of the roads. And so that's a fee to go into the Transportation Trust Fund to help deal with the maintenance of roads. I know that clearly from the polling that was done by the University of Maryland and the Washington Post, that was clearly the least supported of the governor's tax proposals, but that was his rationale for proposing this. You've got trucks running up and down streets that 10 years ago, certainly 50 years ago, you never had that level of additional weight and vehicles on the roads, as we've all gotten used to having Amazon. I don't mean to pick on Amazon, but having deliveries come from organizations like Amazon on a regular basis throughout the day that simply did not exist when these roads were built.
Sorry, muted. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Alan Bowser.
Rich, I've got this question. There are a number of governor bills that seem to
Jerry told me, Alan, Jerry told me you're going to pay an escalating fee for every question you ask.
Okay, that's fine. The governor's got a couple of bills that seem to preempt county authority when it comes to local zoning. There's a housing bill. There's a solar siting bill. I haven't heard the county's position on either of those bills that would preempt local authority. And then I would add to that question, in the governor's budget plan, he wants to raise taxes. I'll call it a millionaire tax. And since we have most of those in the state, how do we feel about the preemption and the increased taxes on millionaires?
So when it comes to the housing bill, we have struggled to see how it has any impact on us. And in fact, over and over in conversations with the governor's office, they are very upfront that this bill will not impact Montgomery County, will not change the way we do things in Montgomery County, and it's really aimed at other jurisdictions around the state. So it's that one, when I first read it and went through it, I was like, oh my God. And then as I started to think about it, it really, the governor's housing bill doesn't change anything that we are doing now. On the
Solar siting.
solar siting, I have to say, I don't mean to disappoint you. I do not have the latest thinking about that. I'm happy to point you towards Dale Tibbetts, who's been very engaged on that from the administration, Garrett Fitzpatrick, who works for the County Department of Environmental Protection, who's the subject matter expert on it, to say where our latest thinking is. So I know that is a heated topic of discussion in Annapolis, changing even today. So, Alan, I wish 12 hours ago I could go back in time and pay more attention to our briefing this morning about all the different items happening in Annapolis. And on that one, I just did not, because I'm trying to balance a bunch of things. I wasn't as focused on that as I could have, should have been. So, but again,
I started watching it and I didn't get that far. And then just a piece on the millionaire's tax. How do we feel about being the ATM for the state?
Well, I don't think Mark Elrich would ever use that terminology. And Mark, as a supporter in general of progressive taxation, you would say, I think he would say, again, reminding people, part of the reason why the governor is going down this path is, we're expecting massive tax changes to lower the rates on the wealthiest people in the country at the federal level. And, being able to say, if you're going to get enormous tax cuts at the federal level, paying a marginal rate increase of 0.5% at the state level in order to keep the services that we appreciate and that I think allow Maryland to remain an attractive and competitive place for investment, then that is a fair thing to ask, that an exceedingly small part of your tax cut at the federal level be offset by a tax increase at the state level.
Thank you.
And one of the other things, the governor's proposal, to be very clear, the governor is also proposing eliminating the ability for tax filers in Maryland to itemize their deductions. He's proposing a higher standard deduction and then doing away with the itemization of other deductions. And that would expose more income as a result to income taxes in Maryland, both at the state and local level, which is one of the things I said during my presentation earlier, is that's why the governor's proposal would increase our revenues by $75 million, because obviously for some people at the upper end, many of whom we are fortunate who live in Montgomery County, they would have more taxable income by not being able to itemize their deductions. And that, without any action by the executive or the council, would increase our income tax revenues. So for full transparency, I wanted everyone to know that proposal was sitting out there, and why I'd said before there would be, depending upon the governor's proposals that are enacted by the General Assembly, that would automatically increase our revenues. Balanced by then other things that he's proposing to move expenditures off on us, which would eliminate half or potentially what the General Assembly does, most of that added revenue.
So I have a question about transportation, but first I want to go back to Alan's question about the governor's housing for jobs bill. I don't know if, have you seen the analysis as an attorney in Chevy Chase, Greg Ullman, that he wrote an analysis of the bill? If you haven't, I'd like to share it with you because a totally different perspective. I was at the hearing in Annapolis where the governor and Jake Day showed up and said, we're not asking anyone to change anything. But if you look at the bill, there's an assumption, a burden on the county to say yes when you're in a deficit, which we are the second highest county with the number of assigned deficits. We can't use anything in our pipeline to meet that deficit. We have to have about 30 some odd thousand new approvals in addition to our pipeline. And while you're in a deficit, you can't say no to any development application unless it fits one of 6 very narrow exceptions, like health and safety of the inhabitants of the building or violation of federal or state laws. But it makes it pretty clear that, it's very only these specific 6 objective reasons for denying it. And we have lots of subjective, the compatibility standard, our environmental standards. It's pretty objective how many trees you need to have, how much green space. None of those things can be deployed to turn a project down while we're in a deficit.
And I know, and when I asked the governor's staff that question directly, they said, this bill won't change anything that you're doing in Montgomery County.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really not correct. And it's disturbing really how disingenuous their testimony was before the state. But, setting that aside, at least I would like to share with you in your office the analysis.
I would be very interested.
He's a very good lawyer. He's a partner at Hogan Lovells. He has spent a lot of time analyzing it section by section to show the impact it would have on us. So I'll share that. My question on transportation is there's a lot of talk, like I testified last week before the planning board. And
can I, Cheryl, before you go on, I would point out for anyone who's interested, this is a situation where the 2 lead committees on the governor's bill in the House and the Senate both happen to be chaired by Montgomery County legislators. So District 15 Senator Brian Feldman and District 16 Delegate Mark Corman will play an outsized role in determining what happens with this bill. And so I would encourage anyone who's very interested in this to make sure you stay on top of both of those legislators. And I'm sure there are people on this call who are residents of District 15 and District 16. And in addition, in their capacity as a chair of a committee, they should be responsive to anyone who's interested.
That's a good reminder. Thank you for that. On transportation, I testified last week before the planning board, and they were talking about how these new now corridors are designed to build where we have transit-rich areas, and they talk a lot about bus rapid transit. And it's never been clear in my mind. I know that it's not funded. The people who live around the University Boulevard corridor are complaining that, the whole theory behind building up those corridors, which go into their neighborhoods, is bus rapid transit, which it doesn't exist and isn't funded. And who funds that? Is it local or state? And what's the prospect of getting it funded, or mark improvements, or any of the things that make legislators call these areas transit rich?
Yes. So I'm looking this way because I'm looking at my computer so that I can pull up and send you the link to our bus rapid transit page so that you can see. So look at that. I will put this link and send it so you can see the 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 information about the whole plan for bus rapid transit in the county. You will notice that University Boulevard is not part of that. The bus lanes on University Boulevard are not part of the vision for bus rapid transit. We do have a service called Flash. Flash is the name for our approach to bus rapid transit. That line does run from the Silver Spring Metro Station to Burtonsville, outside of the north of New Hampshire Avenue, that runs in dedicated space so that it can move along without added traffic. Once it gets past New Hampshire Avenue, it moves into the regular congestion, but there are still limited stops. It's a different approach with multiple, a longer bus to allow more points of entry and exit. Howard County just agreed they're going to provide us with additional funding for us to continue that line all the way to the Columbia Mall, so that there'll be an easy transit connection with limited stops and faster service from Columbia all the way to the Silver Spring Metro Station. The map that is on the page that has the link that shows the whole plan, we have funded a fair amount of the planning for the connection from the Wheaton Metro Station to the Rockville Metro Station and Montgomery College. So it would run more or less Veers Mill Road from Wheaton to Rockville, and then a little bit up the pike to Montgomery College, so as to provide another link and a connection outside of the Beltway to the two ends of the red line in a smoother and far more cost-effective way than the purple line connection inside the Beltway. And then the county executive in the CIP has proposed, but only with the only way to do something major like this is with a connection with the state and ideally the federal government, because in almost every one of these cases, Flash is running along, the BRT lines would run along roads that are controlled by the state. 355, for example, from Clarksburg all the way down to Friendship Heights, obviously is a state road. We need them to participate in any of the changes that we want to make for the infrastructure to allow the BRT on 355 to function. So the state would be our partner in this, and ideally the federal government would be our partner in this.
Last question for Jerry Garson.
The last question?
The last question, yes.
Jerry booked me till 11 o'clock. That's my fee is for.
Well, good news. You get a night off.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Well, I guess you'll have to work on the budget if you have a night off. A question that I received from other residents of the county is, do you see any drop in maintenance of effort for education costs due to the proposed deportation of certain residents of the county?
So, interestingly, a combination of things, the way that the state has smoothed out the enrollment growth and declines over 3 years that was part of the Blueprint Initiative, as well as just slowing growth within the school system. The maintenance of effort requirement, which is you got to fund the same amount of money on a per student basis from one year to the next. Really, the last several years, we have not been subject to large swings in maintenance of effort. In fact, I think this year, maintenance of effort is $5 million. And potentially if the school system, if enrollment happens to decline, maintenance of effort would be zero. Last year, maintenance of effort for us was actually a negative number. even though the county executive and the council agreed to a much higher number. So the maintenance of our effort arguments that sort of dominated the budget situation in much of the last decade have not been the major impact so far. One of the things, obviously, we do not collect information about any students' immigration status. So we have no idea, like every other school system in the country, we have no idea how many students are in our school system whose families, if they lack documentation, their families don't lack documentation. Of course, there is a Supreme Court decision on point from several decades ago that says you have to educate every child who shows up at the door, regardless of immigration status. So, unless the federal government somehow changes course on that through, I'm not sure how, other than a different Supreme Court decision, and however long that takes, we have no idea of how many children are lacking documentation or from families without documentation. So I can't answer that question. We know that there is a percentage of our community does not have documentation, but we'll see what happens as people move around or not, or leave the country by choice or by deportation. I
Sure.
know, Jeff, it's not necessarily a chock full of information answer, but it's the best I can do.
Cheryl, can I ask a follow-up question? So, Rich, I don't understand. So, last year, didn't this MCPS superintendent put in a larger budget than we expected, and the county executive debated a property income tax, and then the county council compromised at 5% as opposed to 10%. And then this year, they put in over $300 million additional sort of increase. How does that budget increase different from how does that not affect maintenance of effort and raise the bar from one year to the next?
So, the big increase in the county executive's proposal for additional tax revenue was we're in FY 25 now. That was FY 24. So it was during 2023 that was the discussion, that budget cycle. For the FY 26 budget, the superintendent did make a very large additional ask. Maintenance of effort, the maintenance of effort law from the state just says you have to put the same amount of money on a per pupil basis from one year to the next. So if we're spending $15,000 per pupil this year, we have to spend no less than $15,000 per pupil next year. But if the number of pupils don't change, then that's no added increase. That was during much of the teens, because school enrollment was going up by 2,000, 3,000 students every year. Just to keep the funding on a per pupil basis from one year to the next to meet that obligation meant adding tens of millions of dollars, if not more, to the school system budget. I would imagine the county executive bearing some unforeseen economic cataclysm. Once you increase the size of the school system budget, that's at a minimum, that dollar amount is going to be what it is the next year. The added maintenance of effort requirement from the state is on that per pupil dollar standpoint. So yes, if he meets the superintendent's request, you would imagine that's a new base moving forward. As far as the legal obligation of maintenance of effort, as long as enrollment doesn't go up, that is not the cost driver. requiring the appropriation by the county, if I'm making sense. I know this is kind
No,
of
I
insider.
understood, and thank you very much for the explanation.
Okay, I know I said last question, but we have one in the chat. I feel like I should read for you, Rich. I'm sorry. The results of the US 29 mobility reliability study clearly showed that managed lane option was 42 million, 34% less expensive than the median lane option in an apples to apples comparison. The council staff analysis and recommendations found the managed lane option is clearly superior in nearly every meaningful metric. So how do you justify proceeding with the more expensive and less effective option?
So is that for the New Hampshire South?
It says 20 US 29 mobility. John Holden, speak up and explain what you're talking about. John Holden.
No, this is for US 29, Colesville Road. The Flash BRT bus in November 2022, despite the outcome of the US 29 mobility and reliability study, the county council, days before 6 new members were going to be installed, decided that they would choose the median lane option, despite the fact that it is much more expensive and much less effective. And the rationale that it was given is that when the managed lane option improves both auto and transit travel times, and the median, these are dedicated bus lanes down the middle of the road, when that only improved the transit travel times, that the median lane was better because, quote, it's going to best incentivize people to make the switch from driving to taking transit.
So that
In
is,
other words, a county council member actually said, you want the greatest delta and the greatest incentive to ride the bus. In other words, even though, and you might ask, how the heck can a dedicated median lane option be even slower than the managed lane option, which is basically HOV lanes and the like? Well, the median lane option, which the council intends to go ahead with, and that the Montgomery planning is right now spending our tax dollars designing, would introduce 10 new turn prohibitions into neighborhoods and area businesses. And because of that, they have to install 4 additional new traffic lights that slows down traffic for everybody. And so, and there were 2 arguments. One had to do with enforcement. Well, there are means to enforce them, and a bill passed by the state last year allows implementation of some enforcement options on these state roads statewide. And the other had to do with, well, you know, if there's an accident in the regular lanes, the median lanes wouldn't be impacted. Is that worth the additional $42 million? And by now, of course, it's much, much more.
Okay. All right.
so I know that the county executive is a very strong proponent of the dedicated lane option. So the in this case on 29, the median lane option, in order to speed the flow of the buses, again, to incentivize people riding it as a way to get people out of single occupancy cars and onto buses. So
I understand that, but the results of the study that we paid for showed that the less expensive managed lane option would actually produce faster commute times for the BRT buses. These are for the BRT buses, than the median lane option. So he didn't even choose the faster option for the BRT.
I don't.
And the managed lane option the less expensive managed lane option would benefit all the buses, Metro, ride-on, school buses, commuter buses, as opposed to this median lane, dedicated median lane that's going to wreak havoc on 29 when it's constructed.
So I will go back and look at that. That's not the way I remember those findings. So lest I embarrass myself any longer, I'll commit to going back and taking a look at that to see what that to see how that phrased, and if the way you're describing it is, I have no reason for you to think you're not, but just to ensure that that's the accurate approach.
All right, okay.
I'm happy to send you the results that were presented back in November 2022.
Thank you, John. We have to move on. Thank you, Mr. Madaleno, for coming tonight. You've been a good friend to the Civic Fed. You come every year and tell us about the budget and explain the ins and outs of it. We sincerely appreciate it. And good luck on Friday. And let us know how we can help.
Thank you. Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. And how can I not keep coming back when Jerry Garson just makes my introduction every year more and more generous and
yes.
green.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I'd like to give you a final thing that we'd like to thank you for the most informative explanation of what's happening with the budget that probably anyone could give in Montgomery County or the state. Thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you.
If someone can send me the transcript so I can say Jerry Garson, I'm going to send that out in my Christmas card this year. Jerry Garson. So this is.
All righty. Okay, we'll send it to you. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you all. Thank you for everything that you all do to advocate for the community. It's great seeing all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All righty.
Everyone, hang in. We're going to move to the next part of our program, which is going to be a presentation by Joe Harkins, who's the chair of the Bylaws Committee, on his suggested bylaws changes. Alan, are you doing the screen?
I was not prepared for that.
Uh-oh.
Let me see what I can do.
Joe, what do you want him to show? The red line or the clean?
Red line probably makes more sense, but I can kind of give a little intro while Alan's working on that. Thank you.
Joe, are you going to share a screen, Joe? Because I can make that happen fast. But if I have to look for it, it's going to take a second.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do that, but if you can bring it up while I'm talking, I think that'll be fine.
All right.
It is
so.
Civic.
So the quick intro. Everybody might remember back in the fall, Cheryl appointed and the delegates approved a special bylaws committee under the current bylaws. And the committee consisted of myself as chair, Alan Bowser, Joyce Wads, and Jeff Slavin. We met numerous times in person, virtually, by email, a lot of discussion. We were essentially charged with updating the bylaws, which were last comprehensively updated in 2013. So it's been more than 10 years for a major overhaul. And we actually shied away from proposing amendments for every single article. We didn't want to overdo the redlining, although, as you'll see, there still is a fair amount of redlining. But the basic idea was to update, to try to incorporate some best practices. All the committee members had the misfortune of being attorneys and had represented various nonprofits. We had some reference points from around the metro area for similar organizations and their bylaws. And the overall goal was to increase the effectiveness of the Civic Fed, first of all, by making it a more attractive organization for member associations and individuals to join. Also to have a more traditional nonprofit structure. And one of the recommendations that you'll see is to actually increase the size of the board of directors and decrease the size of the executive committee, which is pretty much the usual structure for both profit and nonprofit organizations, and we thought would make the advocacy and the mission more effectively achieved. We recognize that some of the standing committees don't have chairs now or haven't been active in a while, so we tried to bring the number of standing committees down to what we currently have. We took a hard look at the various categories of membership, and there are a lot of different categories of membership, but we tried to refine them to make the organization more delegate-centric, essentially to focus on the delegates as representing their neighborhood, their association, and that they would be the primary voting members of MCCF going forward. And lastly, I guess just some updating of language. Some of the language really did seem to come from the 1920s when MCCF started. So you'll see throughout, even the articles that we didn't do a lot with would at least have a little bit of updating language. For instance, his and her, just to bring up pronouns up to date. So I see Alan has the red line up, and this has been on the website. I'm hoping people maybe looked at it in advance, but I can go through with at least some of the major changes article by article and at least give you a flavor for the committee's thinking. And the committee did in some cases have a lot of hashing out and changing of minds and good discussion on really what was the best way to try to achieve the purposes that we set out. So Article 1 is just kind of stating the overall name and objective of the organization and the activities that it engages in. And we here really wanted to do some updating of the language and also recognize that the organization has to operate under both federal and state law. And by kind of increasing the role of the board of directors, we also wanted to make clear, and you'll see this language throughout, that the organization functions at the general direction or the strategic direction of this expanded board of directors that I mentioned. So Alan, if you can scroll down to Article 2, then people can, this is one of the longer ones, people can see our handiwork here. Article 2, the idea was to better define the categories of members. And the fundamental one we felt was the local association. That's where most of the delegates come from. There are also a number of umbrella associations which are made up of local associations. There did seem to be a little bit of vagueness as to the voting. So we came up with what I think is a pretty ingenious way of avoiding any kind of double voting or diluting of delegate votes by having the umbrella associations delegates be based on the households that are not local associations. They're local associations in the umbrella, but they're not local associations in the federation. So we tried to have them be representative, but without having double voting for their delegates. There are also regional organizations which have a set number of delegates, just at 2. Then there's the individual members. Individual members have traditionally not had a vote. They are able to participate, able to serve on committees and other bodies, but not have a vote. We deleted entirely the honorary members because apparently we don't have any honorary members. One item that we took a very hard look at was the past presidents have had a no dues recognition for their past service and also a vote as a delegate. And we felt that the past presidents are really closer to the individual members, that we want their contributions and we want their voices and certainly their participation, but not necessarily in a voting capacity, which does, in a sense, dilute what the delegates are doing. The delegates are representing a neighborhood or a neighborhood association. So we kept it as a recognition factor for no dues. And we also clarified that if a past president obtains another capacity or gets to vote through another capacity subsequent to their past presidency, we would, of course, recognize that they're voting in that capacity. And I think all the red line language that's up there kind of reflects that. There's another group that we call an associate entity. We changed the name there. What we were really trying to capture there were the municipalities within the county. They have a representative, not a delegate. It's also a non-voting role, but we did think the various municipalities, such as Somerset, Jeff Slavin is the mayor of Somerset, they certainly have a contribution to make, but we felt it wasn't necessarily with a vote. So then, if we go on to Article 3, Article 3 concerns dues, and the actual dues amounts, as I assume people know, are in the standing rules. So we didn't want to get down to the level of the amounts of dues, but we wanted to essentially have the board of directors have more involvement with setting the dues, the schedule, and also dealing with delinquencies of members. We felt that that was a good board of directors role. And again, ultimately, a lot of the language changes we're proposing, we see as kind of a platform for the organization to obtain more members and to use it as a way to attract more members. And the delinquency would also lead to no voting, but it could also be cured. And then in addition, at some point, the board of directors could decide a delinquent association member is no longer able to, can't be cured if the dues can't be collected, no longer able to participate. And then Article 4, if Alan, you could scroll down there. This is the article about the organizational structure of MCCF. And in expanding the board, we were working with the officers, the standing committee chairs, and then 3 at-large board members. There already are at-large members of the executive committee, but we kind of took that concept and moved it up to the board of directors so that the board would have more members than the executive committee. And then we reduced the members of the executive committee to the elected officers and the newsletter editor, because we felt that was most consistent with the board setting the general direction and strategy for MCCF and the executive committee implementing it. We did suggest changing the name of the newsletter editor to communications director with a little snazzier role there, working with various committee chairs. And the other appointed officer, I believe Jackie holds both these offices now, but the other official, used to be called appointed officials, would be the webmaster. And then standing committees, as I said, we kind of reduced to what's currently been active. We did some consolidation. You can see the list there, what we're proposing to eliminate and what we're proposing to put together or consolidate, and then also to add a membership committee, because we felt, since our mission overall was to increase the participation of associations in MCCF and thereby increase its effectiveness as an advocacy organization, that we could have a committee focused on membership and working with the second vice president, which has already in the old or the current bylaws has been charged with maintaining a database and trying to increase membership. So we thought that was a good collaborative effort, and the one committee that we added. Article 5, if we go there, a lot of the A lot of the duties, the descriptions of the duties, we actually didn't change, but we wanted to be sure they track with the structure that we have for them. So Article 5 deals with the powers and duties of both the executive committee and the board. And again, as I've said, the overall approach is to have the board, which would meet twice a year, provide and be bigger, provide overall direction, and then the executive committee be more focused on implementation of the affairs of the organization. And of course, like most nonprofits, the board is, kind of ultimately providing direction wherever it can. And the board of directors also can, I mentioned the 2 meetings a year, but they can also meet more than that if necessary. Then Article 6 is about officer elections. And we, as a committee, essentially felt that the election last year, May to June, worked pretty well. And that it provided for an electronic secret ballot, which seemed like a good way to elect officers from a slate or officers who were nominated from the floor at the May meeting. So we tried to incorporate both those paths into this, but in terms of procedure, use the procedure that was used last year. Tied to that, we added, or are recommending adding, a July meeting after the June annual meeting so that the new officers who'd be elected in the May-June period would take office in June and could kind of hit the ground running, so to speak, in the summer and have a July newsletter and a July meeting. And then, of course, kind of like the French, we'd still have off in August, so there wouldn't be a meeting or a newsletter that 1 month. But we felt that would get the organization and the new officers off the ground a little better for September. The other recommendation that's tied to this, and it's actually in Article 10, it's a little further along, but we're recommending beginning in 2026 to have 2-year terms for the whole elected officer slate, so that bylaws amendments themselves wouldn't, provide incumbents with any particular advantage. But beginning in 2026, it would make more sense to have 2-year terms for the officers. But people would have plenty of notice that that's the plan, assuming the amendments are adopted. Article 7, Alan, come up on 7. Again, a lot of this was more language changes. We didn't really change the substance of the duties. It was kind of updating in terms of stylistics, but we felt the description of all the duties really were pretty good. And then Article 8 deals with what used to be called appointed officials and are now called other officials. We got that down to the 2, the communications director and the webmaster, and described their functions. Same thing for Article 9, the standing committee duties. If we kept the committee, we largely kept their description of duties, updated the wording in some cases, and then we added the membership committee, which I mentioned earlier, in terms of working with the second vice president. Article 10 concerns the meetings of the Civic Fed, like this one. As I mentioned, we added July. We updated the language to allow for all types of different meetings, in person, electronic. That was really a question of updating. We tried to clarify, again, looking at last year, we tried to clarify that the June meeting is an annual meeting, which is a requirement of the organization under federal and state law, that the annual meeting, which is doubled as an award ceremony, could have business conducted at the president's discretion, but basically is focused on announcing the new officers and presenting the awards that the awards committee confers on various people within the county. And again, in terms of conducting business in a more traditional way, we have the July meeting right after the June awards meeting. Article 11 goes to how the meetings are presided over, and we expanded a little bit in terms of the president, the first vice president, and then in an unusual circumstance, you might have another officer who could preside at a federation meeting. We took a First Amendment approach to the right to speak, which seemed a little bit limited earlier in terms of any attendee, any non-delegate speaking. We certainly want non-delegates, other participants, other members to participate and speak. So we just left it to the presiding officer. As long as you're recognized, you can speak. Article 12 is executive committee meetings. Again, this is a smaller group, but we allowed for regular and special meetings. We tried to better define quorum. We did this throughout for all the federation's bodies. A quorum is a majority of the body, and action taken is a majority vote of those present. And we had a kind of overall provision to provide that. So it would be consistent whatever body we're in, unless the bylaws provide for a super majority. There are a couple places where there are super majorities, and we generally left those in place. Article 13, in terms of federation positions, we really didn't do anything here at all in terms of official positions of the organization. Our thinking was that one article might merit some further work if the federation wanted the committee to continue its work, but we felt it was certainly serviceable now, but didn't really need any redlining at this point. Article 14 is the newsletter, and I've already covered the idea of a July meeting and a July issue. There's always an issue that goes with the meeting. Article 15 is the awards. Again, updating for current practice who the awards are named after and their purpose. Article 16 is financial management, and this was partly updating and partly just a best practice improvement. The updating is to refer to bank branches as opposed to safe depositories, but also to provide for both checks and electronic transfers. And then in terms of the best practice, we came up with 2 signatures, or really 2 authorizations for an electronic transfer for funds over $500. And that would certainly allow Jerry to run things, but if there was on his own, but if there was a bigger expense, that there be another officer involved, which just seemed like, again, a best practice, not trying to cast any aspersions at all, certainly towards our treasurer. And then there we also did allow for any special disbursements from executive committee if needed, but that would generally not come up a lot, we thought. Article 17 is amending the bylaws. So you'll see the language we're currently operating under, we felt needed mostly to be clarified, that there's kind of 3 bodies involved in terms of amending the bylaws. One is the executive committee. 2 is a special committee if appointed, which we were, and approved by the delegates, and then a delegate from the floor offering an amendment. So there's kind of those paths to come up with proposed amendments, but the same procedure pretty much to have the language published, have the next meeting debate them, and then have a vote. And here's one of those super majorities, a 2/3 majority of delegates present to adopt new bylaws and bylaws amendments. And we kept that super majority provision as we did with the others that do appear here and there throughout the bylaws. So the idea this year, if these are passed, this is really just kind of informational, or trying to summarize and you all to look at the language, not a formal debate tonight. That would happen in April. If these bylaws amendments were adopted, the provision that we just went over would be in place for the officer elections in the May-June timeframe, unless we thought that in the future, maybe some bylaws you wanted to have a particular date or effective date, that could be provided for in the bylaw itself or in the resolution that supports the bylaws. The last couple of articles, and hope everybody's still awake. The last couple of articles are about indemnification of these new positions that we have. We broadened that a little bit in order to attract good people and expertise to the organization. And then dissolution of the organization, should that ever happen, just to kind of update there. And that's how we kind of plowed through all these. And a quick summary, happy to answer questions. Again, not trying to engage in a debate so much tonight as just kind of give you a flavor of the thinking of the committee members. And of course, the committee members are welcome to chime in and answer questions and give you a sense of our own internal debates and how we came up with the language that we came up with. Thank you.
Okay, so as Joe said, and it was also announced in the newsletter, debates and amendments and vote is going to be at the April meeting. Tonight we have a presentation and we're going to have questions if you want to understand the change, the meaning, or hear what the committee, but we're not going to have arguments and debate with people tonight, but we're going to have questions to help you understand it. And then you've got a month to think it through, and we will debate it and vote at the April meeting. Peggy, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Simple-minded question. To the best of my knowledge, our website has never shown or much less listed members of a board of directors. And my recollections go back almost 30 years. We have not, in my recollection, ever had a meeting of the board of directors. Is a board of directors something required by state law?
By I believe the federal and the state law.
And what is the purpose of that?
Well, any legal entity has to have an ultimate authority, and you see this in the private sector too. I mean, generally, sure, the management runs the company day to day, but if there's ultimately some sort of disagreement at that level, it goes to the board. Same for a university with a board of trustees. Doesn't happen all that often, but you are supposed to have a body that can make the ultimate decisions for the entity and that can provide overall strategic direction.
Thank you. And just for purposes of keeping this short, I would like to submit for the next newsletter some observations on some of the things that are being proposed. I hope that will be permitted.
We'll talk about it with the other officers, because otherwise we'd have to open that up to everyone, and I'm not sure we can do it. Do you have another question, Peggy?
No?
Jerry Garson?
We are a 501c4. Most of these bylaws seem to think that we're a 501c3. If we'd like to become a 501c3, we need some of these changes. But at the moment, a 501c4, which we are, actually can propose legislation and things like that. That should be somewhat clarified. Another thing that I have a problem with is in Article 10 on special meetings. We should have some provision for what I call special meetings that we've run in the last month or so. If we want to have a meeting that would not be discussing what I call general business, such as having someone from the state legislature or county council speak. We had
Okay, Jerry, Jerry, you're out of order. Tonight is questions about the changes and the meaning
well,
of.
I think we should have some change on the special.
You can submit that as an amendment at the next meeting.
Or an amendment, yeah.
An amendment at the next meeting. Do you have a question about any of the changes?
On the $300 limit, basically, almost every major expenditure nowadays is not done by. I'm sorry, my wife has a phone call that she's picking up. It is not done by check. Basically, almost every expenditure, such as in insurance and other stuff, will be over $300 and will be paid by a credit card. The language should be changed, unless for some reason we want checks. But basically, I think we've only issued 2 or 3 checks in the last year. Everything else has been by credit card.
Okay, that's an amendment you can propose, Jerry.
Okay.
Karen Bolte.
Cheryl, I'm sorry. So this might be an amendment. I was just curious about if we wanted to leave standing committees, like, for example, environment in the bylaws, even if it's not currently active, so that you don't have to go back and amend the bylaws if you want to have a specific committee.
Joe?
Right. Well, I think we put energy in with the environment on that specific one. That was more of a consolidation. But some of our thinking behind reducing the standing committees was that special committees could still be used for all sorts of different purposes, and maybe would be better, for certain issues. But one thing, again, we were thinking in terms of a new association considering becoming a member and looking at a document of bylaws, say, to learn more about MCCF, that it wouldn't be too long and that it wouldn't have a lot of lists of categories. And then, somebody trying to lure them in, has to say, well, we haven't, filled that since 2010 or whatever. So we were really trying to get some of these categories down to what's really used now, because we thought it was a good selling point for new members.
And I'll just throw in one of the shifts is that we should make really reflects current practice, whereas legislation, we rely on the expertise of the committees of jurisdiction.
Right.
To follow issues and then propose what we should be doing legislatively. That's what the Housing Committee has been doing. So that just kind of reflects current process.
Yeah, we didn't think you needed a kind of a legislative committee to be on top of a substantive committee dealing with legislation.
Paul Jarozinski.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
So, Joe, I'm a little confused between who we elect and who we vote for. There's a set of officers. Then there's a board of directors. Are we voting for board members, or are they designated? And what's the difference between the board members and the executive committee? And I noticed the executive committee has particular powers, but 2 of the members of the executive committee, at least, communication director and the webmaster, don't look like they're being elected by anybody anyway. So,
well, those other officers are actually approved by the delegates and after nomination by the president. And the board would be the same, but it's more of a nomination and approval process than an out-and-out election. So everywhere we could, where we felt it was practical, either the delegates or the board itself was approving these different offices, so that everything, had kind of a check and balance to it.
So again, I'm trying to clarify who is on the board of directors. Is it the same people or some of the same people on the board? It is some of the same people. It's some of the same people now. There's still overlap, and we did struggle with this. It's hard in a volunteer organization to get all these positions filled, and we, of course, ideally, like to have more input.
but we felt that in making the board bigger, we would have the officers, the chairs, and the up to 3 members at large, board members at large. We'd be able to tap expertise that way at that level, but you would still have a smaller executive committee to do more of the day-to-day.
So would it be difficult for you, just for clarity, to list what you envision the board would be if there was, like, let's say the president's automatically on the board and the executive committee? So list who is an automatic member and then who gets voted, just to know the difference. And the one other point that I thought could be problematic, a specific point, is on Article 17, where you say the bylaws amendments could be done by the executive committee or a special bylaws committee. And that, to me, that looks like you're setting up a problem for who's going to decide which committee you're going to use there. It would seem that, especially on that particular one, you want to have one committee or the other responsible for that task and not have a constitutional crisis for which committee was going to determine how the bylaws were changed.
Well, I think the thinking was that the officers, or the executive committee, well, it's actually, the wording is, I think, is currently executive committee or bylaws committee. So that problem might have already been embedded in the bylaws. But I think the idea was, for extensive, comprehensive reviews like this, you would want a special bylaws committee for a 1 or 2 issue way to address something that came up. You might want to just use the executive committee and then bring it to the delegates. But our thinking was, with the supermajority requirement and ultimately the delegates voting, you could really use either path. Perhaps we could be a little bit clearer about our thinking there. And
I'm just thinking that sets up a constitutional problem that you probably want to avoid. Now, maybe you want to say it will be reviewed by the bylaws committee to be submitted to the executive committee. Then that makes a little more sense, because then you have multiple levels of review to why you changing something that's been this way for 10 years, and the bylaws committee can give feedback. And then, but you really only want to have one committee and not get into a point where we're going to be arguing about which committee should be handling the change. Just to think about.
Okay, good points.
Thanks.
Elliot.
Yeah, question. Article 1, Section 4, the committee was recommending a changing the phrase elected office to elected political office. Could you share with us what was the thinking behind this and what you saw as the difference between those two phrases, and who's it covering?
Well, it would cover primarily federal, state, and local elected political offices. I think there was some concern if you just said elected office. You might have some organizations where we wouldn't be endorsing or supporting a candidate. I think it was really not a lot of discussion. It was just, what we meant was, government service elected offices.
Well, then let me suggest that you propose that language rather than saying political. Because when I saw political, the first thing I said was, wow, they're exempting the school board? That if political is a stand-in for partisan, but I didn't think that.
Yeah,
I don't think we wanted to go that direction. But I think what you have suggested is what you meant. I would urge the committee before the next meeting, perhaps propose that as substitute language.
Okay.
Thank you. Carrie?
Yeah. I'd like to suggest something, and
Is it an amendment, Carrie, or is it a question?
Well, it will be an amendment, but I want to explain it first, if you don't mind.
Well, that's for next week. I'm not going to keep you here all night to debate this.
Well, if you'll let me say it, it'll go a lot quicker, As you know, I'm a past president, and the last time the bylaws were changed, two members, I was the president when they were changed, and the two members that headed up that committee, Peggy Dennis and Luella Master, are in the chat tonight. There are a few things, and I'm dealing with historical memory here. There are a few things that you're changing that I think have a different explanation as to why they were the way they were. And Joe, unfortunately, the past members weren't on your committee. So my motion would be to allow Peggy and Luella, because they did run up the bylaws committee last time, simply to write a short article for the newsletter so that they can explain those changes or what that impact would be. I'm getting tongue tied. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But
Peggy's asked for the ability to
let
write
me
it, and
finish, Cheryl, if you don't mind. And I'm sorry to be a burden here, but I think that if they could write something, I think that the membership would benefit by their historical knowledge and their explanation as to why they were the way they were in the bylaws. I don't think it would be very, very many items, but it may be beneficial to especially delegates that are new to the organization, so they can have some benchmark as to why the bylaws were written the way they were. Thank you.
anybody else have their hand up with a question? Peggy does. Peggy, go ahead.
Yes,
I need a vote.
I'd like to piggyback on what Karen Bolte said, and that is, I think we should keep all the standing committees, because committees are generally a committee of one, and it's one person who has a particular interest in that issue or topic. I particularly think it's very important to keep legislation, but legislation should have two co-chairs, one to follow legislation that the county council is putting in and be able to keep on top of it, and another to follow the legislation in Annapolis. I think that's really important. That's all.
Any other questions about the document? Request for
I
clarification.
had that
I just
motion.
want to, I'm sorry, this is Ira Unger. I just wanted to agree with Peggy. I think it's good to keep all the committees because they're all important areas. That's it.
Well,
I had
they're all
that
important
motion.
they're all important areas, but they, to be in any way functional, have to have a volunteer that actually does the work. So that's a different story. Okay. Carrie, you're going to offer a motion to allow Peggy to write an article and put it
Peggy
on.
and Luella jointly, so that they can offer some substance to why the bylaws were what they were on certain changes. Let them go over it, because they went through it very comprehensively the last time. So I'd like to have that benefit to the rest of the delegates in the organization.
Thank you, Carrie, and I will second your motion.
All right. Do we have any discussion of the motion? Okay. Well, how are we going to deal with responses to what Peggy and Luella say? Or are they the only ones that are going to be publishing in the newsletter?
They can be discussed at the meeting.
At the next meeting?
Yes.
Oh, so yours gets published in the newsletter and everybody else holds their comments for the next meeting?
Well, if people want to forward comments to me and Luella, we could certainly incorporate those.
Oh, okay. But you two are the only ones who get to publish, and people can give you comments and maybe you'll publish it, but everyone else has to wait.
So sure, I don't think it's a problem. So Peggy and Luella can write an article, goes in the newsletter. We also have, we have our amendments and vote at the next meeting. So it just would support what we've had in the newsletter this month. So I don't think it's a big deal.
Could I make a suggestion on that, since some people will be writing something in advance, and that might be a helpful jumping off point for the debate. The writers of the article maybe should expect the presiding officer will kind of limit repetition and return to the article so that we can all read the article and then at the same time, respond to it at the debate.
Right.
Yeah, I'd also ask, I mean, I guess Carrie started off, and I obviously am new to doing this kind of thing for the organization, saying that Peggy would write about historical, and then there was the question of other comments, and I would not like to see those mixed in, because the historical background of the bylaws is different from people just looking at these and saying what they like or don't like. And if I'm going to read the article, I'd like to know which is which. So I guess my thought is that, we've had a discussion about a historical piece, or a piece that throws the historical light on the changes, and to have that go into sort of general comments kind of mixes the two of them together. And I guess my suggestion would be that general comments versus the history be raised at the April meeting.
We can write it up, separating out those two things, historical context and suggested change.
It probably would be helpful then if suggested change just went to Joe as the bylaws committee.
And I think it would
it's a
help.
different box,
I think if people want to offer amendments.
Or an amendment.
An amendment would help to, if it went in advance and you're not composing it on the fly at the meeting, and then we can put them up on the screen one by one. So I think amendments can be submitted to Joe and we can deal with them there. And we'll have an article about history in the next newsletter written by Peggy and Luella. All those in favor of Carrie's motion to have Peggy and Luella write an article on the history of the bylaws?
Now, excuse me. I did not say that we would be writing a history of the bylaws. There are several places where historical context would be appropriate and helpful, but not every comment we would like to make has to do with history. So please don't box us in like that.
That was what Carrie said, that it was important for people to know, as you, the former chairs of the bylaws committee, what the history is.
Cheryl, what I said was the changes that Joe offered, okay? There is a historical context as to why those bylaws were written the way they were.
Right, and that's what the article is going to be about, right?
Yeah, just the changes. There's no reason why Peggy would have to write the entire bylaw, every single, nook and cranny or piece, and try to explain why the Federation did what they did on each piece. Only the changes.
Okay.
It keeps it short.
The article is going to be about the historical reasons about why certain parts of the bylaws were written the way they are.
Right.
He and Lowell submitted for the newsletter.
And that's to keep brevity and keep people focused on what Joe is suggesting to change. That's all.
Right, but it sounded like some of the other topics were better for amendments at the next meeting than this historical context article.
I just don't know why, if everyone else is doing amendments at the next meeting, 2 people are allowed to publish only their amendment.
There's a difference between a change, okay, and someone adding to it in an amendment. I mean, anybody can say, well, I think this should be in the bylaws and it's not in there now. So I'm making a motion for that to be added to the bylaws. But anything that was changed, I think members would benefit knowing why they were written the way they were written. That's all. I mean, I don't think it's that
all those
difficult.
in favor of Carrie's motion to allow Luella and Peggy to write such an article, please say aye.
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 All those
Aye.
opposed say no. Okay, all those opposed say no.
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 No. I'm going to abstain as a member of the committee and not having that kind of background.
Okay, so it sounded like there were more ayes than noes. So the motion is adopted. Liz Joyce, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes, I wanted to say that if the historical background article turns out to be an editorial, there should be it should be an option for there to be another piece that expresses whatever concerns the article raises.
No, there's not going to be an option to have an editorial about these bylaw changes. They're going to be debated by everyone at the same time. The article is going to explain if there is a change in the bylaws, why the bylaws were written the way they were written, and not an argument about why something else should be happening.
Why it should be the way it was.
That's debate.
That's what I'm just trying to clarify.
Correct. That's the way the article will be if
Okay.
published. Paul Jarozinski.
Yes, bylaws changes are always arduous things to take on.
You think?
And they should be for good reason, because you don't want to be playing with them every other year. So, and a lot of work goes into it by all involved, and it's good to have it. So my only comment would be, it would be nice to have all these things a week before the meeting, and even some of the amendments that may be proposed, so that we can think about them, we can talk about them, because otherwise we'll spend 3 hours at the next meeting and wind up coming back in April to talk it all over again. So it just things like I asked Joe, because I don't understand the most basic difference between the board of directors, the executive committee, and the officers, and which ones I'm going to vote for and which ones I'm not. And that's a core key item before you can even get into the rest of the stuff.
So, I mean, I think I just want to add, Paul, I think that everyone is voting for the same people you always voted for, or was just shifted them. Are they an executive committee or a board? The procedure has always been the president, when they're elected, nominates committee chairs, and that goes to the membership for a vote of affirmation or approval.
So I recognize that, but I mean, and so the way it's been, I've been around the Civic Fed for a while, but I'm still not clear to me who automatically through an election gets on one or both of those committees, or whether we're electing somebody else at large to be on one or both of those committees. And because they weren't there before, right? We didn't have, because my HOA has a board of directors. We don't have an executive committee. So that you had lawyers go through that. I'm not sure why they're going to make it that we just had ours rewritten 5 years ago, and we still just have a board. No,
we currently have all of the officers. You can just go back and read our bylaws. All of the officers plus committee chairs and members at large are on the executive committee. Now they're going to be called a board, and what we call an officers committee, I guess.
Oh, so all of us are on the board. That would sound awkward.
Right. The board traditionally is a greater number of individuals.
But usually not the whole membership. And what Cheryl just described was the whole membership.
No, I didn't.
No.
I said the officers, the committee chairs, and the 3 members at large are currently on the executive committee, and now they're being called a board of directors. And the membership is voting for the same offices they've always voted for, which is the officers, and then an affirmation vote of the appointed committee chairs. What we have now is what's called an officers committee or something like that.
Executive committee.
Which
it's still executive committee, but it's small.
Right, we have an executive committee with all of those people. Now they're a board. We have a smaller group, which is just officers, and they're going to be the executive committee. There's just a switch around of names, but it really is not that big of a change. The people we're voting for and the way we vote for them, whether it's by affirmation or direct election, is the same.
So all that's good, but it should be defined somewhere so that somebody else walking in off the street can figure out what we're doing.
Okay, Jackie.
If there's Peggy and Luella are doing this historical piece showing what on the items that are being changed, why it was the way it was originally. And then you have amendments that you want people to send in or changes to the amendments or something. They could send them to me and I'll compile them and put them in an article. So that would be 2 separate things.
Okay,
Yeah, that makes
I
sense.
have people do that, I can pull that together from their suggestions.
okay. And then we can put the newsletter out, I guess, or put all of this out a week before the next meeting.
Yes, it can come out in time.
The next meeting. Okay. There, any more questions?
Jackie, what's your deadline?
It's always the 26th. I don't know why that's funny, Peggy, but 26, and it'll come out the 1st of April roughly. The meeting's not till the 14th. Is this, or is there another meeting earlier than that? Is that not this? It's not the monthly meeting?
It's going to be at the regular monthly meeting.
Okay, then there's plenty of time.
So the regular monthly meeting will be the 14th. So this actually wouldn't have to, somebody asked for it a week in advance, come out on the 7th. So.
Well, doable.
Okay, good. I would also point out that all three documents we've all been discussing are on the website, the current bylaws in a clean version, the red line, and then if the red line were accepted, a clean version of the proposed amendments.
Okay. At this point, we don't have any other items of business. Is there any new business that anyone wants to bring up? No.
Yeah, I would. Ira Unger here. I know it's late, and I don't want to get dragged into a whole long thing, but I should report that in the era of Camille, first of all, we've rejoined the Civic Federation, and we have 3 members here attending, so that's good news. And then we should at some point give you a little bit of an update. The community is really in an uproar against the whole University Corridor plan, and as well as the dedicated bus lanes on University Boulevard. And there's just a lot of challenges about whether the BRT and any prep for the BRT is appropriate at this point for funding of the BRT. And I know we've gone over these issues a lot of times, but I just to update you that there's a lot of, we had about 80 people showed up at the planning meeting, and somebody asked Elridge to come over to Camp Mill this week, and he is coming. So there's a lot of activity. So I'll leave it at that. If anybody else wants to chime in.
I would like to, one more thing. Tomorrow, the county council is going to be meeting on these housing initiatives. I mean, what we talked about today with Richie Madaleno, I mean, the funding element is huge. I mean, the state's looking at a $3 billion deficit. We may not have the impact taxes that we need to pay for infrastructure. The county may be facing some budgetary issues. All of that. Please attend the meeting. Include the financing in your testimony. We've got to impress upon them. I mean, these projects are going to cost money, and somebody's going to have to pay for them. And it looks like with the pilot program and the impact fee loss that it's going to be us that pays for all the infrastructure for all this new housing. So please keep all that in mind.
Yeah, so back to Ira's point, we were on attainable housing, and then we moved to the next pending bill, which is the more housing now. But I mean, I know a lot of people are concerned about the corridor master plans, and they've announced that Georgia Avenue is next. So, and those plans were discussed at the planning board discussion of the More Housing Now last week. And they made it clear that there's nothing about these More Housing Now plans that is going to interfere with their ability to come back on corridors and do a more extensive corridor plan, because that's a much more extensive process and usually takes in many more properties. So that is, we do have to have corridor plans discussion here. And the never-ending sort of fire hose of land use bills that we've been facing. I do know that we have to get up to speed on these corridor plans. We sent out an announcement that Andrew Friedson will be with us on March 24th. I really think people should come and raise the issue of revisiting the corridors again and what's going on with these corridor plans. So we can find out, you know, as we've discussed before, we were told attainable housing, nothing's pending, there's no bills, there's nothing, and then there's a 92-page ZTA. So I'm hoping in this March 24th meeting that we can ask Andrew Friedson, you know, what are your plans on housing generally? What's next? How many bills? What's going to happen with these corridor plans? So we should really try to have a full discussion with him about these issues. But I do understand, Ira, that we need to give a lot more attention to the corridor plans. I agree.
I mean, there's been some criticism of the lack of engagement or lack of public engagement by the Planning Commission. But in the meantime, the DOT, Montgomery County Department of Transportation, has put in dedicated lanes, and it was supposedly a pilot program, but I found out recently that several months, if not a year early, it was recommended by the MCDOT to SHA to make those lanes permanent without any public outreach, any public response. So the whole issue of, you know, trying to make Montgomery County more livable, more sustainable, et cetera, it has to be done, you know, in concert with people, you know, in the communities. And apparently it's not being done by different departments that should be aligned. In other words, this should have happened after the discussions of the Planning Commission, not before. And even the engineers who laid down the lanes didn't know that the plan had been approved, who were supposedly coordinating the process. So again, this is a long discussion, and I don't want to, make us later.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I do know that we need to do more work here on that because it's next. The expansion of the corridors is next after this More Housing Now proposal. Okay, if there's no other new business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.